welcome. We're going to take a minute before we get started just to let folks come in. If you're able to and want to share, please share where you're calling from in the chat. If you're just joining, we're going to get started in a minute. Just wait for folks to join. Let us know where you're calling from in the chat. Awesome. Colorado and Wisconsin so far. So glad you're here. New York. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Sherman, who's going to lead our webinar.
Appreciate it, Christian. Everybody, good evening. Thank you for joining us from wherever you may be. If it's East Coast right now, nighttime, afternoon, other places. So I'm Sherman Neal. I'm going to walk you through this presentation today about parks, not prisons, defending our communities and lands from border walls and detention camps. A lot to do there. So can we go next slide, please? So on the agenda today, we have three places that we're going to hone in on. One being the Everglades and Alligator Alcatraz. The second being Laredo, Texas, and the Lower Rio Grande Valley and the border wall, amongst other things going on there. Folks in Georgia, the Okefenokee, and talking about the folks in ICE Processing Center. And then we're going to nest all of that under what we're talking about with our Parks Not Prisons campaign here at the Sierra Club. And then we're going to close out to try to find some collective actions that we can take in making connections with each other, hopefully in the outdoors. So next slide, please. So the Sierra Club, for those of y'all that aren't familiar, the Sierra Club is the largest and oldest grassroots environmental organization in the country. There are chapters in every state, all across, ranging from Alaska to Puerto Rico. And frankly, everybody's been interested in this work. It's touched everybody. So a lot of what the Sierra Club does, from building power through grassroots organizing to make changes and explore, enjoy, and protect the environment, is all nested in what we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So we're going to be joined today by four speakers, including myself. I'm going to introduce them here, and then when we get to each individual's specific cause or public land, they'll be happy to walk through any other details. So first, I'm Sherman Neal. I'm the Deputy Campaign Director for the Military Outdoors Campaign here at the Sierra Club. Been here about 2 years. I'm based in Johns Creek, Georgia, which is North Atlanta suburbs. Prior to joining the Sierra Club, I served 10 years in the Marine Corps as an attorney, as a reservist, and also as a logistics officer, and deployed twice to the Middle East as part of that service. I'm also still a practicing attorney, generally concentrate on family law, environmental law, and sports and entertainment law. And here at the Sierra Club, our mission with the Military Outdoors program is to remove barriers to access for veterans, military families, and service members, and ensure that they have equitable access to the outdoors and can enjoy the healing power of nature. So relevant to this conversation, I've spent time in Miami at the law school there, went to law school in West Virginia, and also lived in Tennessee, where I studied political science as well. So our panelists at the top left here, I'm going to start with Professor Lopez. And so Professor Lopez is established and directs the Jacobs Public Interest Law Clinic for Democracy and Environment at Stetson College of Law. She also teaches courses in civil procedure, advanced legal research and writing, environmental practice, topics in biodiversity, and environmental cases, including a course titled Cases and Places. She comes to Stetson Law from the Center for Biological Diversity, where she served as the environmental nonprofit's Florida director and senior attorney for over a decade. She holds Masters of Law in Environmental and Land Use Law from the University of Florida, a JD from the University of Denver Strom College of Law, and a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Arizona. She writes and lectures on access to courts and decision makers, corporate interference in democracy, climate change, water and air quality, and environmental justice, and the extinction crisis. So appreciate you joining us. Now we're going to go to our top right, Trisha Cortez, who is the executive director of the Rio Grande International Studies Center. For 16 years, Trisha Cortez has led the Rio Grande International Studies Center, which is the only environmental organization in Laredo. Through her visionary leadership, the center has grown into a powerful voice for the Rio Grande and Borderland communities facing environmental justice. And she didn't list it here, but she's an awesome storyteller, has a background in journalism, and just is a strong community organizer and advocate. The bottom left, Danny Purvis. Danny is a passionate advocate for wild places and creatures. She is also a field science and data set. She's a field scientist and a board member for Wild Cumberland. As a Georgia native and avid outdoor recreationist, her love for wildlands and waters comes by way of paddling, backpacking, climbing throughout Georgia and anywhere else where she finds herself at the moment. All things that are going to be relevant in our discussion as well too. And then finally, we have Edward Ornstein. So Edward is the Deputy General Counsel and Embassy Director for the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. Edward serves as the Special Counsel on Environmental Affairs for the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. He's tasked with managing the tribe's environmental and natural resource law and policy portfolio. He graduated from the University of Arizona with a dual certifications in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy and Environmental Law. And he also served as the editor-in-chief of the Arizona Journal of Environmental Law and Policy. He currently serves as the vice chair of membership on the Native American Resources Committee. So a lot of smart people in the room. Next slide, please. So level setting for why we're having this conversation today on March 24th of 2026. It was exactly 365 years ago where the Army deployed to Big Bend National Park for the first time since the Clinton administration. So, 365 days ago, you can see this headline here where, the officials in Big Bend say that they're not going to be making arrests. Now, we know what's happened over the past 365 days, as we'll get into, and we've seen how what we allow at our border, along our border lands, and then on our public lands to include places like Big Cypress and Florida, which we'll get to, manifests itself in our cities, in our other communities, and in our own lives. And so if you're not from one of these impacted places, if you feel like the border is something that can't touch you, if you feel like a detention center in the Everglades is something that can't touch you, I would encourage you to look around where you're at now and see how what we've allowed to transpire on public lands has made its way into your community. Next slide, please. So here, Parks Not Prisons. This is a campaign that the Sierra Club had launched last year as we started examining these issues. This quote and why this is relevant to the work that I do with the military and veterans and service members themselves is the reality is who gets touched immediately in these situations. And so, first, none of us has signed up to domestically deploy on our public lands and detain our people and inhibit people from having freedom of movement on our lands. The top right corner there is a picture of a battalion of Marines that come from 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, who were occupying the city of Los Angeles at the time. That's the same unit that I had served with a period of time. That same unit also has had deployments to the southern border. Neither of those things are things that were within the vision of what I nor many Marines sought when we sought to serve our country. What we sought is the bottom right there is a picture of myself and my daughter who were able to go to California and enjoy a park that was not occupied, that was safe, where we were able to conduct community science projects not oriented on checking water levels for, different E. coli or other issues that come with detention facilities, but to learn about the world around us and explore, enjoy, and protect. So that's my personal why I'm invested in this work and why it matters to the military and service members. Next slide, please. So here we're going to start on the pathway of how we've got started in this portion of the work. We know that the border, since its inception, has been a place of conflict. It's also been a place of peace. It's also been a place of assimilation. Knowing that people like the Buffalo Soldiers were some of the first border patrol to go, and then also became some of the first leaders on our public land. So here in Arizona, when we first got indications and warnings of the border wall being built in the San Rafael Valley, we hosted a rally for the valley together with partners in the Borderlands Coalition and led by our Canyon chapter in Arizona. And so one of the things to hone in on is the border wall itself, pre Big Beautiful Bill, and the plans being laid out that were already destroying some of these lands and seeing where they're at now. So next slide, please. So from that point in time in Arizona, where we had a multitude of communities, activists, organizers that had familiarity with these issues, we saw the issues grow into places like Florida in different ways. One of these ways was the establishment of Alligator Alcatraz in June. And one of the things that we recognized as the Sierra Club was the necessity to educate not just our base, but people generally on the lands that we are using to villainize, human beings, to create a space where people feel other people don't feel safe. People feel like this is a purgatory of society. Whereas, anybody that's been to kayak, to hike, to run, to stargaze knows that that's not what these lands are about. And so this Parks Not Prisons campaign for us, one of the first things that we did was host an outing in the Everglades where we had about 60 people come from the across the country to spend time in Big Cypress, build connection with the land, build community with each other, and try to identify how to talk about these problems, such as what's led us here today. So next slide, please. So again, this crisis that we have manufactured is masking what the true crisis is that we see play out every day, which is the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is what's driving the global migration of people. We can see that today, without having a whole different conversation about the Middle East, on how our dependence on energy itself and how we navigate our relationship with that impacts who's going to be in our country, how we see those people, and how we treat those people. And so again, Parks Not Prisons is about the people that are inside of that facility on that tarmac in the freezing temperatures sometimes, or in the face of hurricanes. But it's also about the impending worsening of the problem if we don't address the climate crisis simultaneously. So next slide, please. So here, just very briefly, each of these could be a class in itself, but wanted to kind of show you some of the flashpoints for where we started and where we're at today. So starting from the left, if we look at January 2024, obviously we had the manufactured crisis in the form of the executive order about this invasion rhetoric. 3 months later, we see Stryker vehicles, a Stryker brigade deployed to Big Bend National Park. We see other things happen, but I think the flashpoint for us is the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill, which accelerated some of the harm. You immediately see Alligator Alcatraz get stood up, where they allegedly going to get reimbursed. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And then what you don't see in between July and March are images of Chicago, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Charlotte, Portland, in New Orleans, a litany of other places that then became occupied cities. So again, what we allowed on our public lands matriculated over into our public cities. And now if you look at March 2025, it's going into more of our iconic places like Big Bend National Park, into our urban areas like Laredo and it's accelerating the process, construction and maintenance of detention centers in places like Folkston, Georgia, and the Everglades. So next slide, please. So we'll take questions in the chat, and then we'll try to address those at the end. And if we don't get to those, we'll definitely get back to you. Just wanted to note that here. So next slide, and I'll be turning it over now to Jacqueline Professor Lopez to talk to us more about the actual litigation and how she has led work through the clinic to support the CBD Center for Biological Diversity in front of Everglades and where that's at today. So.
Thanks so much, Sherman. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, so I would like to just start off by acknowledging the folks that helped organize this presentation today at Sierra Club and my co-panelists today about this really important information that we're sharing. Next slide, please. And the presentation that I'm going to share with you is actually a combination of presentations that were prepared by and given by the two plaintiffs that initiated the lawsuit. And you're going to hear from Edward Ornstein, who represents the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, just after my presentation, who represents the tribe that intervened in the case. And so I want to acknowledge that information is coming, but these presentations are the result of the work of the Executive Director, Friends of Everglades, Eve Samples, and the Florida and Caribbean Director for Center for Biological Diversity, Elise Bennett. And I've used these slides, repurposed them with their permission. But that is not who I represent in this matter. I represent Sierra Club along with 4 other proposed amicus interveners. And an amicus is a friend of the court, so we are authoring a brief that intends to help inform the court on a particular issue or perspective. And in the case with these particular clients, they're all environmental nonprofit organizations with shared missions to restore the greater Everglades, who recognize the importance of preserving our nation's Magna Carta environmental law, the National Environmental Policy Act. So I'm going to refer to this case as the Alligator Alcatraz case. Acknowledging that it's disgusting, acknowledging that it's intended to dehumanize people, but also because I'm not going to sanitize the federal and state government's words for them. And they need to live with the choices they've made. So I'm going to continue to use that, but I'm also going to give some perspective about the ridiculous nature of this. Next slide, please. So this is part of the greater Everglades, which is a region in South Florida that spans well over 1 million acres. And as you can see, there's very little infrastructure here. And if you've been in the Everglades, you know, of course, yes, it's Florida, so it's hot and it's swampy, but it's also quite stunning. Next slide, please. This is Big Cypress National Preserve, where Alligator Alcatraz has been constructed. And this is the preserve at sunset. And what you're seeing here is sunset in between 2 cypress domes. So in our swamps in South Florida, cypress, they like deep water. And so they grow rather quickly in our karst geography here, where we have little pockets of limestone that can sustain a bit of water and a bit of soil and an otherwise kind of unforgiving terrain. And these cypress trees grow in these areas where the land is actually a little bit lower because they like it a little bit soggier. And so the largest trees grow in the deepest water, and that's where you see the dome shape there. But inside of the dome, you can't see it from the horizon, but inside of the dome is actually a hole where none of the cypress trees can grow because it's actually too deep. And oftentimes that's where you'll find an alligator. Next slide, please. You might also find my kids there too. That's how perfectly approachable and generous Big Cypress is to all of the plants and animals that rely upon it. And as you can see, I have no fear that my children won't escape Alligator Alcatraz, that they won't be able to hike out without alligators nipping at their heels. And I know Edward will provide much more detail about how people have sustained off this land for time immemorial. Next slide, please. Some of our other friends that use this landscape are our beautiful Florida bonneted bat. Bonneted bats are the largest of Florida's 13 bat species. And as you can see from its ears here that sort of sit over its head like a bonnet, Florida bonneted bats are actually so large that they're the only bat we have in Florida that you can hear when they give its echolocation call. Then you'll see our very charismatic Florida panther. This is a kitten. Florida panthers used to range all the way out to Arkansas and are now reduced to just 5% of their original range, which is just in Southwest Florida, which is where Big Cypress National Preserve is. In the bottom corner here, this is our eastern indigo, and this is another imperiled species. His Latin name actually means forest lord, and truly he is, because he will eat anything in the forest, including venomous snakes. He is not venomous. He is perfectly docile and harmless to us. And then finally, in the bottom corner there's the Everglades bully, which is it's a shrub that you might otherwise overlook from a distance, but up close you'll see that paradoxically it has these fuzzy leaves as well as sharp thorns. And it just really beautifully symbolizes the harsh and beautiful conditions that you might find in Big Cypress. Next slide, please. Here's the preserve and all the different species that live there. And then you can see the gray slab is where Alligator Alcatraz has been constructed. Next slide, please. You can see here, this is where the Florida panther likes to hang out. All of the red and green pings are panther pings off of their collars. So we have so few panthers that we're able to actually often capture them and collar them and figure out where they are. And the yellow there is Alligator Alcatraz. Next slide, please. Here's another slide demonstrating where the panther likes to be and where Alligator Alcatraz is. So you can see it's right in the heart of panther country. Next slide, please. And the bonneted bat, we know that bonneted bats need actually dark skies. Unlike other bats that might like a little bit of light because it attracts insects, bonneted bats do not. They need clear, dark skies and clear, unforested areas. Because they're so large, they actually can't swoop through the forest. So Alligator Alcatraz is now a tremendous source of light pollution. And so we're concerned about impacts to bats. Next slide, please. And so here is, again, that first image, and that's Alligator Alcatraz circled there. And you can see how remote it truly is and how disruptive it truly is to have now hundreds of people, several thousand have moved in and out of the facility now. And the facility has no connection to electric grid, to sewage, to potable water. So all of that has to be brought on site and taken off site. Next slide, please. It's not the first time this site has been under attack. In fact, why it was chosen perhaps is because there was one small landing strip, and that's all that was constructed. In the late 60s, there was a plan to develop the whole area to be the largest airport in the world. But Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and others banded together to stop the jetport and protect it as part of the greater Everglades region. Later, this area was designated by Congress as Big Cypress National Preserve. Next slide, please. And in part because of the advocacy on the jetport, we were able to pass the National Environmental Policy Act. So the irony should not be lost on us that the court that actually adjudicated this case has found that NEPA does not apply. So next, I'll show you a quick timeline and then turn it over to Edward. And here's the jetport as it stands. Yeah, go ahead, next slide. Thank you. This is what it looks like now. That little strip there was a jetport and everything else is new construction for the facility. Next slide, please. So we first learned of the proposal to take over this land. It's owned by Miami-Dade, and the state said we want to buy it. Miami-Dade said we have concerns and didn't sell it, and the state took it anyway. Soon after that, several protests started happening in the area to raise awareness. Next slide, please. And quite quickly, actually, Friends of Everglades and Center for Biological Diversity, and shortly after that, the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians mounted this lawsuit against the state and the federal government, alleging a number of claims, but the one they moved on for a temporary restraining order to enjoin the construction, further construction operation, was under the National Environmental Policy Act. Soon after, detainees start to arrive. Next slide. The tribe joins. And there was a 4 to 5 day long trial in the District Court of Florida. And Judge Williams found for the plaintiffs and said, state, you have to stop what you're doing and you have to dismantle it. So that was just a success. Next slide. But the state and the feds appealed that decision to the 11th Circuit. And in addition to their appeal, they filed an emergency motion to stop the effect of the lower court's stay. And that panel, which is at this time is when the amici attempted to file their brief, which the court rejected as moot because it had already decided to stay the lower court's injunction, meaning that operations could continue. And that panel also went above and beyond and stayed the lower court's proceedings so that plaintiffs had their hands tied and could not continue to pursue their other viable claims. Meanwhile, there have been a number of efforts to get additional documents out of the state, and the feds and Friends of Everglades had some success with a lawsuit to get some of those documents out, including the conversations that they were not able to get out at trial, indicating that the feds have always intended to pay the state for Alligator Alcatraz. Next slide. And here's where we are now. We have the 11th Circuit is going to hear the full appeal on the merits in just a few weeks in Miami. But in the meantime, the state is free to continue to operate the detention facility with impunity. On to you, Edward.
Well, good evening, folks. I'm Edward. I serve as the Deputy General Counsel and Embassy Director of the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. The Miccosukee Tribe is one of 2 tribes of Florida and are the native peoples of the Gulf coastal wetlands, called by neighboring tribes like the Timucua, the Amakaana, meaning the wetland people, a name which eventually became Makariski and then Miccosukee. And the Miccosukee people, they speak the Elepungi language. You can kind of see their traditional hunting and gathering and living range wherever there's a bunch of E's on the map. So Chattahoochee to Okefenokee down to Kissimmee and Okeechobee. And all of that was part of an area that, the Miccosukee were at home at. And in the late 1600s, the Miccosukee rebelled against forced labor in the Spanish missions. In the late 1700s, the Miccosukee and the Miccosukee-Spanish War fought the Spanish Empire, burnt down a bunch of the plantations in East Florida, did the longest successful conventional siege by a native army on a European installation, the Fort San Marcos in sort of the Tallahassee area, and eventually pushed the Spanish into submission in 1802. But then, unfortunately, that was followed by the First, Second, and Third Seminole Wars, where the Miccosukee were again forced to fight for their territory. And the First Seminole War saw the Miccosukee removed from the panhandle of Florida. The Second Seminole War saw the Miccosukee pushed south of Lake Okeechobee. And the Third Seminole War saw not much at all, because at that point, the Miccosukee were already pushed deep into the Everglades and the Big Cypress. And the Secretary of War at the time, Jefferson Davis, was writing back and forth with his colonel on the ground, Gustavus Loomis, who was complaining that he couldn't find the Miccosukee because they really knew how to move in this ecosystem. So I don't think the irony is lost on us that the land that the Miccosukee are fighting to defend from an unauthorized installation of a federal facility on public lands, which were intended to provide extra protection against escapees, is exactly the land that the Miccosukee escaped to over 40 years of guerrilla warfare. Next slide, please. So the last time there were large-scale immigrant detention facilities was World War II with the Japanese internment camps, which was authorized using the same Alien and Enemies Act that has theoretically authorized the construction of these same facilities today. And World War II was followed by a little bit of an austerity period in American fiscal politics. And one of the impacts of that is they started going through and terminating tribes on paper, not, by the sword anymore. But the termination era lasted for a lot of the 50s and 60s until it was eventually ended by Nixon. And during that period, the recognition of the 2 tribes of Florida was terminated. The United States refused to acknowledge that there were still Indian tribes who controlled land and had rights within the state. And so eventually the Seminole got a negotiated resolution, but the Miccosukee instead killed 4 deer, sent 4 buckskin declarations, one to Eisenhower, who ignored it, one to Queen Elizabeth II, who was a polite woman, so she sent a red receipt, another to the King and Queen of Spain, who eventually received the Miccosukee, but only once the politics had died down, and they couldn't do much anyways, because their country was mostly run by Francisco Franco. So they sent the fourth to the former Spanish crown colony, with whom they'd had a diplomatic relationship throughout much of the 1700s. And that was a little island called Cuba. And so this guy with a real long beard down there, named Castro, got this rolled up deerskin, saying that the Miccosukee were fighting for their rights and their land. So we welcomed the Miccosukee down. Miccosukee had it down, and Foreign Minister of Cuba recognized the Miccosukee as a sovereign nation controlling all of Southwest Florida. Not much longer after that, in '62, Kennedy recognized the Miccosukee as a sovereign nation. But then came the fight for the lands. What lands did the Miccosukee control? Because much of the Everglades had been turned into Everglades National Park. And when that happened, they kicked the Miccosukee out. The creation of most national parks was accompanied by these evictions. And so when that jetport was intended to be built in the Big Cypress Swamp, there was a bit of a fight by the Miccosukee and some of the local non-native folk who live off the land, the Gladesmen, and a negotiated compromise was reached, and Big Cypress became the first multi-use national preserve, something that didn't just recognize conservation, but also recognized, the right of folks to off-road and hunt and fish and all that jazz. And it actually included, unique among, national park legislation as a general rule, explicit recognition of Miccosukee and Seminole hunting rights, fishing rights, but also occupancy rights. And so throughout the Big Cypress National Preserve, there are 15 traditional villages. Next slide. And those traditional villages have been inhabited prior to the creation of the National Preserve. Next slide, please. And here's a map of those villages. You guys are starting to get the geography of BC pretty well. You can kind of see, you see that big cluster of pink on the right side where there's a bunch of villages at once. And you see how there's sort of a bend in the road there, and there's sort of a bottom of the bend on the right side and a top of the bend on the left side. The top of the bend on the left side, if you look above that, there's sort of a gray smear, and that's Alligator Alcatraz. So when that facility was built with the intention of being, quote unquote, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by alligators and pythons, what was actually happening is they were building it in the middle of an area that was quite densely populated by the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes, which is a problem. Next slide, please. And so the closest village is 1,000 feet away from the entrance to Alligator Alcatraz, or just about 1,000 feet. I didn't take out the measuring tape myself. There's 3 miles that span with 11 of these traditional villages and a few ceremonial grounds and traditional burial grounds as well. That big yellow dot on this map is the Miccosukee Reserved Area, which is more of a line than a dot. And that dot's right about where the K through 12 school is. And there's school bus stops at every one of these camps or villages. We call them camps because back in the day, they were camps during Seminole Wars, but today they're sedentary villages with, walls around the community and, concrete block houses and all that jazz. And every single one of those villages has a school bus stop, and the school bus stops at one after the other on the way to school. And so the school bus is stopping right out front of Alligator Alcatraz. This is a facility whose construction is directly impacting the tribe, its practice of hunting and fishing rights throughout the preserve, which it has a right to do, and it was constructed with no notice and no consultation. And the tribe has a good record of standing up for its rights. It's kind of what we were talking about there throughout history, but the tribe's done it in court too. Went up and down to the Supreme Court on some water quality issues and tried on some flooding issues. And when we were trying to figure out the best approach with this particular facility. And there was an elder who said, even if it seems like a hard fight, we have to fight now. So that the next generation knows that we tried to fight when we had that opportunity, so they know when to fight when it's their turn. So the tribe intervened in the litigation, which was initiated by the Friends and Center, and has been a co-plaintiff since within a month of the facility's creation. And the tribe is committed to seeing this illegal and unpermitted construction in public lands without the consent of taxpayers who are funding it, or taxpayers and citizens who are using those public lands, nor the Miccosukee tribe who's at home there. It's not what any of us want to see this land being used for. So thank you all for the time.
Thank you, Edward. I'm going to turn it over to Tricia to pivot a bit and talk to us about the border wall and national defense area and everything going on down in the lower Rio Grande and Laredo.
Hi, everybody. Bienvenidos. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon from the big bad borderlands. My name is Tricia Cortez, and I'm with the Rio Grande International Studies Center. We go by RISC for short. The G may be silent, but we are not. And we're a research and an advocacy environmental nonprofit here in South Texas, in Laredo. And I'm so happy that y'all are taking some time to be here with us to learn about these really important things and for us to figure out how we fight back and demand better from our government. I want to talk a little bit about the border wall and what's going on. I know it's not at the forefront of the national spotlight, just given the daily chaos happening with this administration, but also I know that ICE, rightfully so, has dominated so much, but my hope is that the border wall must become a central part of the national debate and dialogue right now. And let me tell you why. What's happening right now and the plans of this government, it is a massive transfer of title of public and private lands into the hands of the US government. That is what they are after. And it is a massive project that they want to do that consists of several pieces, generally speaking. Number one is a 30-foot steel wall. By comparison, the Berlin Wall was 18 feet. This is just on a different level and different scale. Number two, what they are also doing this time around in Trump 2.0 that is different is they have plans to install hundreds of miles of these big buoys that will be anchored in the Rio Grande, in the middle of the river channel, this dynamic river system that's our only source of drinking water. It is a distressed river system. It is an incredibly important ecological corridor as well. And so they have these buoys that they are planning that would be linked together with chains and, with some kind of cement anchoring that would just stretch for hundreds of miles. And then, of course, they have what is called the Security Enforcement Zone, the SEZ. And, generally speaking, they want to take about 250 feet off the bank of the river, like a 5-lane highway, and devegetate and denude it, and which becomes home for their military vehicles, high-intensity floodlights, other types of things, plus the wall. So you're talking about massive impact. And that's what a lot of this is. And what is very deeply alarming this time around in 2.0 is the government's plans, as Sherman mentioned earlier. is to introduce what are national defense areas, NDAs, and they've already started a few. They just announced one for Laredo last month, and essentially the operations of the border would not be with DHS in their plans and their big vision. It would be with the Department of War. And so it's this very dystopian kind of a place, if you can imagine a whole region. And so that's one, just so you have an understanding of what this is. The other thing that is really important about this is the disenfranchisement that happens with this project, because unlike any other region in the United States, what happens is, in order to rush construction of the wall, and they've been doing this for years now, the DHS secretary suspends and waives dozens of federal environmental historic preservation protections. And now, really, under Trump 2.0, they have fully waived all federal procurement and contracting laws too, kind of like a wild, wild west. And what is really terrible about this is we don't have access to the NEPA. We don't have access to all sorts of laws and protections that any other place in the United States would have with such a massive infrastructure project that will be so destructive and so invasive. The other thing that is deeply alarming under Trump 2.0, talking about disenfranchisement and wanting to convert us into second-class citizenry on the border, is the right of entry. These are documents that CBP, Customs and Border Protection, they mail out to private landowners. As you can imagine, in Texas, and especially in a place like Laredo, Webb County, and Zapata County, a lot of private landowners, overwhelmingly. And so everybody they started to receive these right of entry documents, ROE-C now. And it's a very different creature from Trump 1.0, which the government would do this. They wanted you to sign. And if you signed, they would come onto your land to do studies and surveys, some staging. And if they wanted that land, which they did, then if you said no, they would sue you, and you would go through these condemnation eminent domain proceedings, which are protected by the Constitution and which are not waived by the waivers. However, this time around with the ROEs in 2.0, is the government is now, they always apply a tremendous amount of pressure. And if you sign, you essentially are giving them the ability to begin construction of the wall and bypass these condemnation and eminent domain proceedings. And a lot of landowners aren't fully aware of this. And you know, you have to think about who we are and how targeted we feel. A place like Laredo, we are 96% Hispanic, super Hispanic place. So you feel very targeted of a place where they are coming after you to shove something down your throat that our community clearly does not want, and was very vocal and fought back really hard during Trump 1.0 and was successful in preventing them from building wall here. Under Trump 2.0, it's a bit different. As they mentioned earlier, the OB3, the one big ugly bill stuff, has given them $46.5 billion to do this. And they've got these new things with the ROEC and these NDAs and the river buoys, and it's really extraordinary. And the way they justify this, it's that narrative about the border, right? That there's an invasion and we're a lawless place, and it's crazy, and which is not true. We are going through historic lows of apprehensions. Our sector, there are 9 sectors along the U.S. southern border with CBP. The Laredo sector, where Webb and Zapata counties, we always kind of rank in the middle of the pack. We're not a high crossing area. We've been at near zero historic lows for many, many months. And so there is not a justification for this. So let me just tell you a little bit about what's going on in Laredo and more specifically the Laredo sector. So the feds have a plan to seize land and take land to build 153 miles of this border wall, along with a denuded, devegetated, militarized security enforcement zone, and install 108 miles, and then install 153 miles of these buoys. And they've already awarded a couple $2 billion in contracts to different contractors, Fisher Sand and Gravel, Salisco, kind of some of the same characters from 1.0 and a few more. So that has happened. But, you know, the wall is impacting different places along the border in very different ways. You know, some places have indigenous tribal lands. Some places are pristine wildlife preserves and special places like Big Bend and places in Arizona and so forth. In a place like Laredo, it's really different. We are an incredibly urbanized place that was built up against the river. We have about 25 neighborhoods with tens of thousands of people that live right up against along the river. And there's over nearly 15,000 dwellings and tens of thousands of people. We just contracted a fluvial geomorphologist, a river expert, Dr. Mark Tompkins from Flow West, who has studied rivers in the US and Texas for 28 years. And he did deep investigation of a border wall downstream from us in the Rio Grande Valley, deeper in South Texas. And this just happened a couple of weeks ago, and it's created a firestorm because what he made very clear to us were a couple of things. He described what is the inevitability of system failure. And he described this, what is going to happen with this river when you create these enforcement zones, the wall, and these buoy systems. You start to straitjacket the river and you lose conveyance. You're capturing debris and you're losing conveyance. So the water is going to rise and the velocity is going to increase. And the river, as distressed as it is and suffers from low declining rainfall and precipitation, this river floods. The flood of 2010, the river in Laredo rose 42 and a half feet. I mean, it's extraordinary how much volume and energy this river, what happens during flood events here. And Dr. Tompkins also talked about the inevitability of the destabilization and demise of a river system, the erosion and the scouring and what is going to happen from such a system like this, of which there's no precedent that you can really base off of. But more importantly, what has happened is it's clear to us, this is now for us, this is about life and death. This is about, you have a break in the wall and these neighborhoods, and you have this concentrated force of floodwaters coming in. And there has been a firestorm in Laredo that has happened in the past couple of weeks, understanding this with these neighborhoods, many of which are dense, most of which are very low income, but some are working class, some are middle class. And the really, one of the terrible things about this is there's no transparency, right? The feds waived all the laws. They don't have to do any assessments, and they have not turned over to any of the local governments or officials here any design plans or construction plans. So, you know, how do you prepare for that 1% that you always must prepare for with rivers? How do you do that without these designs? How do you leave 25 neighborhoods and tens of thousands of people so vulnerable to a Kerrville situation or a Katrina situation. And it's something that our community is not willing to accept. And that's why I'm so glad y'all are here, so you understand what is happening to us. And we need to do everything the way that we can. And if Minneapolis taught us anything, it taught us that if people rise up, they can change the outcomes of what a terrible federal government has planned for that community. And that's what we must be doing now. And so I wanted to share all of this with y'all. And we are doing everything that we can, and we need your help to make sure that this gets elevated to a national level, because it's about life and death here. It's about a dystopian future for a huge part of the United States. And it's about destroying not just the ecology of this place, but it's also about destroying our way of life, our ability to freely bird, fish, bike, hike along the river. And a community like Laredo that's so old, older than the United States. We were founded in 1755. Native Americans were here thousands of years before. And to cut us off from that drinking water source, and it's really shameful. And thank you for being here and listening to this. And we really need your help on this. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Trisha. And I'm glad well, not glad, but when you talked about the water levels rising, and obviously we saw in Texas last year with the flooding and what happened. And as we transition to Georgia and talking to Danny, a lot of this money, whether you're talking about Alligator Alcatraz, Texas, or even Georgia, is tied up in FEMA, right? And so as we'll transition to Danny here to talk about Folkston in the Okefenokee Swamp, keeping in mind that Georgia just got hit by Hurricane Helene last year, right? We still are in recovery from that, and we're seeing a lot of these monies being diverted from those recovery efforts to these projects. So appreciate it, Danny.
Thanks, Sherman. And thanks for my fellow panelists for their excellent presentation so far. This is, next slide, please. This is a slightly different situation as the ice processing center that I'm going to be talking about is not actually on federal land, but adjacent to it. Next slide. So I am talking about the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, which is 440,000 acres of swamp and longleaf ecosystem that spans 3 counties in Georgia and a small portion of a county in North Florida. And you can see in this map the 3 gateway communities in Georgia where you can access the park. And we're really focused on Folkston today. Okefenokee is a dark sky park. It's Ramsar wetland of national importance, a national water trail, national recreation trail, and an important bird area. It has a lot of great qualities about it that make it a crown jewel of Georgia. Next slide. And it is the largest intact blackwater wetland ecosystem in North America, which makes it very special. You can see the contrast in the black water of the red cypress trees adorned in Spanish moss. There are over 70 islands of hardwood hammocks and vegetation scattered all throughout the park in and around the water, and longleaf ecosystem surrounding the waters. And that in and of itself is a critically endangered ecosystem that supports a lot of unique species. Next slide, please. All the diverse ecosystems facilitate a lot of biodiversity. There are over 400 vertebrate species found in Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, including over 15,000 American alligators, a large Florida black bear population. The longleaf ecosystem supports endangered and threatened species like the red cockaded woodpecker, gopher tortoise, the eastern indigo snake, and the bottom right, you can see wood storks, which have recently been delisted, and they nest in Okefenokee. Next slide. And in 2024, the U.S. nominated Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge for a UNESCO World Heritage designation under the criteria that it's black water, wetland ecosystem, and its unique biodiversity and the conservation of many threatened and endangered species meet the criteria, among many other criteria for a World Heritage Site designation. And this effort was taken in part, it's a long ongoing effort that started, I believe, in the 70s. But this was really fast-tracked as a bipartisan effort in Georgia with Senator John Ossoff and Representative Buddy Carter issuing a resolution to nominate Okefenokee in response to a threat of a titanium mine that was proposed along Trail Ridge. That threat has since been mitigated with the purchase of land along Trail Ridge by the Conservation Fund. But the bid for the World Heritage Site designation is ongoing, and we'll actually find out in July when the application is reviewed whether the site becomes the first National Wildlife Refuge to receive that honored designation. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through these tables in too much detail, but there's a lot of anticipated economic impact of a UNESCO World Heritage Site designation based on analyses done at other sites like the Grand Canyon, for example, and the Everglades, actually. So the top table here shows the economic impact of the National Wildlife Refuge in 2022, and you can see that it supported 750 jobs and generated $11 million of tax revenue in that year. The bottom table shows the most conservative estimate of an increase of about 75% of visitation by 2035 and what that would be anticipated to generate. And they believe on a conservative estimate that about 600 new jobs would be created and an additional $8 million of tax revenue would be generated just from the tourism alone. And I didn't include this in the slide deck, but the majority of the largest spending would come from international visitors, about $100 on average more per international visitor than domestic visitors. So there's a lot of potential, not just for revenue generation, but also bringing in a very different group of visitors than have historically come to see the Okefenokee. Next slide, please. But I think it's really important to understand a little bit of local context and to understand sort of unique challenges in Folkston, Georgia, because while 80% of visitors access the Okefenokee through Folkston, which is in Charlton County, 90% of the revenue is actually captured in the city of Waycross in Ware County. And that's largely because Folkston lacks the lodging, retail, and food service businesses that would support a robust ecotourism economy. And it's a very exciting opportunity to build in that infrastructure and to essentially address some of the underlying issues of depression within the city of Folkston by creating thriving businesses and a space that the community wants to aggregate around. And right now that's just lacking. Next slide, please. The other thing I think that is important to understand about the community is while in general the majority of people very much are down for Save Our Swamp and want to see the Okefenokee protected. There was a very large local outcry when the titanium mine was proposed. There's also a sentiment among some of the local residents that UNESCO would bring foreign governments into the local operations, and that there's a sort of suspicious attitude toward UNESCO and foreign entities being involved in any capacity in Folkestone. Next slide. And that context, I think, is very helpful to see against the largest job provider in Folkestone, which is the ICE Processing Center, or FIPC. If you look at the map on the bottom right, you can see that right down the street from the Folkestone Gateway into the National Wildlife Refuge is FIPC. And in 2017, the GEO Group, a federal contractor, took over a private prison and turned it into a detention facility with a 1,000 bed capacity. In 2025, GEO Group received a $47 million contract by the federal government to expand FIPC from 1,000 to 3,000 beds. So if they were to complete construction right now, this would be the largest ICE detention facility in the country. They're currently constructing that expansion, and knowing that there are 3 gateways to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge in Georgia, if I were an international visitor, I personally would not want to go to the community that was harboring the one of the nation's largest ICE detention facilities. So I think that the contrast between what's the two big developments in Folkestone of this UNESCO World Heritage Site designation and then the expansion of FIPC are poignant contrasts in where we allocate our resources and the decisions that we're making for our communities. Next slide, please. And these photos were taken by some of our partners at Advancing Justice about 2 weeks ago. I just want to give you a sense of what it looks like on the ground. It very much is a prison. The photos inside FIPC are abysmal. Next slide. And the FIPC has a history of violations. During the first Trump administration, the violations were the highest they had been documented. And then in 2019, where you start to see a downslope in violations, that is more related to DHS's redefinition of what constitutes a violation. And they have much more stringent criteria now for when a violation is documented. So that decrease that you see in this chart is more a reflection of how we're defining detention violations rather than detention becoming safer. It is, in fact, not the case at all. And there have been many documented deaths in FIPC. It's just tragic, and there's no real consequence when those occur. Next slide, please. I really wanted to highlight the team at Advancing Justice. These are legal experts, policy advocates, and they're the boots on the ground folks who work directly with detainees at FIPC and other detention facilities in Georgia. And I think as I was considering what's really highlight about these issues and what the future of movement looks like around immigration and militarization activities around public lands, I think historically we've approached a lot of environmental issues in silos, just like human rights issues are approached in silos. And this partnership that we have with Advancing Justice to understand the various systems that are overlaid in these issues is creating a more thoughtful analysis of what's happening and how to shift dialogue with the local community. There's certainly, I think the majority of people acknowledge that FIPC is the biggest job provider in the community, and in a depressed community, you take any job you can get when they are finite. But there are community members who acknowledge that those jobs are variable and depend on the immigration policies of the federal administration, and those jobs could go away. And another aspect of the jobs at FIPC is that there's actually a minimum credit score that you have to have in order to get a job there. And so a large portion of the community doesn't even meet the requirements to get jobs at FIPC. So having this partnership with folks who really understand some of the aspects of the way that the prison is operated has allowed us to think more critically about the ways in which they're investing their resources in this community and the opportunities that are there and exist to shift those priorities and support more sustainable, beneficial economies like ecotourism. Next slide. And the last thing that I'll mention that is not at Okefenokee, but definitely needs to be mentioned here is a new mega detention facility that is being built in Social Circle, Georgia, which is about 40 miles east of Atlanta. This is one of 8 mega centers that ICE is constructing, and thanks to the government shutdown, the construction is on a hold. But this giant warehouse is going to be converted into a detention facility that can house anywhere between 7,500 and 10,000 detainees. Essentially, Georgia will have 2 of the largest ICE detention facilities across the state, and will have a disproportionate amount of detention capacity. So I'm really, really appreciative of the opportunity to call attention to that and to talk briefly about thinking about these issues in creative coalition building sorts of ways. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Danny. And as someone who lives in North Georgia, that's not too far away from home. And kind of before I know we're in overtime here, but as we transition to questions, I think it's important what you said about, remembering what's happening in places where you may not be yet. And so I see it in the comments quite a bit about Minneapolis, which is awesome. But to me, what's been pretty awesome in Social Circle is this town of 5,000 people fighting against a facility that's going to house 10,000 people potentially. And seeing how that's happening in smaller rural environments and how they're channeling Minnesota and trying to be, and how we can learn from both. Similar to here, how we're going to talk about briefly what we can learn from the 3 places that we just discussed, and some of these tactics, techniques, and procedures, and just some call outs from the guests. So the first question I have is for anybody. It's where do you see opportunities to collaborate across borders and regions based on what you've heard today? You got a first volunteer?
Sherman, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I'll slow down. So where do you see opportunities to collaborate across borders and regions based on what you've heard today?
Is that for one of us?
Yeah, that's for one. Yeah.
Oh, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think when people start talking to each other and sharing these stories and using our networks of elected officials, people we know in certain committees, right now, leverage points is this DHS bill, right? I mean, that's a leverage point and what might happen in the midterms. And we've got to be prepared. We've got to write our plan. We got to do our project 2029. But we need to start laying the groundwork for what is going on with how DHS operates, I believe. And I think we can do that starting to talk with each other and brainstorm and putting together our key pieces of how we think our places should be governed and based on real need. And a lesson that we learned during Trump 1.0, we were told over and over 1,000 times, this is a done deal. And we learned that nothing is ever a done deal and no one is ever invincible. And as stark as it may seem, I think we need to go into this believing that and knowing that despite the horrendous things that this administration is doing and providing all the resources for it, they are vulnerable. There's a lot of Americans that are not okay with this, and we need to take advantage of that, but we need to prepare and we need to plan and we need to put together our midterm transition and our Project 2029 transition plan.
Look forward to seeing your first draft of that. I'm sure you got one cooked up. Does anybody else wanted to hit on that question just based on what you heard today amongst the group?
Yeah, I can say that actually what's happening in Big Cypress has been a really nice focal point for some of the work and organizing at FIPC. There were a lot of parallels that helped us think through and strategize different approaches to addressing environmental issues and potential issues to the expansion of FIPC. And so I think starting to see some of the through lines and some of the effective organizing that's happening in other places not just helps with solidarity, but in strategy and being really efficient with our resources and creating a narrative across our communities that if people are hearing over and over and over again, it's like a rallying cry. And I personally am seeing that in a lot of various areas of the work that I'm doing. So I'm really appreciative of the trailblazing that y'all have been doing.
Appreciate that. I personally appreciate the outings aspect. I had never been to the Okefenokee. I had never been to the Everglades till this year. I never knew the minimum, the maximum height that a wall could be where it wouldn't interfere with the butterfly migration pattern in South Texas and things like that, which is pretty awesome. So as we're doing some of this work. So the final question for closing, it's going to direct towards Jacqueline. If you don't mind, I'll put you on the spot first. It's, in this hour, we've heard from organizations with different missions, resources, demographics, and connections to their impacted communities. How can big green organizations like Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity, others that you work with and represent, build power in this moment and take what, y'all have been leading from a litigation standpoint and achieve some systemic change like Trisha had mentioned?
I might take a different approach to your question and reflect that if you're not on Trump's shit list, you're probably not doing enough. And that's all there is to it. As small-minded as the tyrant is, he does have his set of priorities, and there's a whole half of a country that has mandated that work. So if you're part of an organization and you're not making waves, you're probably not doing enough. And there's just nothing else to say about it. I've seen, sadly, and Alligator Alcatraz is but one example. I mean, look how many plaintiffs there are. There's 3. How many organizations have hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of members that care about that area? Dozens and dozens and dozens, but only 3 were willing to stick their neck out there. And the more emboldened people become to fight for what is necessary, the stronger we'll be collectively. And so I think we just need to realize that. Maybe not the question you asked, but that's the one I wanted to answer.
No, that's the answer. I think people like myself need to wake up in here every morning, right? That have the privilege and opportunity of being here. So, Edward, I think as one of the 3, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, the Miccosukee tribe is a tribal nation. It's not ultimately an advocacy organization, and it's not a partisan organization. And what's united Miccosukee with the partners that Miccosukee has in the litigation and in the advocacy is the care for the land. And litigation is important. I'm a lawyer. We love to think that lawyers are important, you know. But what's equally important is advocacy. And as strange as it may be to realize or to accept, I do think that all politicians are doing what they think their constituencies want. And Florida's a 2/3 Republican state, supermajority in the House and the Senate, and the governor. It's a pretty red state, and nothing can be started or stopped in Florida without either a Republican initiative or a bipartisan initiative. And I think it was a fundamental miscalculation that parks or prisons was a partisan issue. I think a lot of people, regardless of their political alignment, value their public lands and value the opportunity that the NEPA process creates to ensure that their public lands, maybe the most valuable thing that people share in ownership of in the United States, are appropriately stewarded. And in Florida, I think people should have expected this to be a concern because, totally different issue. But earlier this year, some folks tried to build a bunch of pickleball courts across this public lands of Florida. If you're not from Florida, this is not an issue you were tracked. But there was immediately a huge groundswell of opposition to converting public lands into something for profit. Not because pickleball is a partisan issue, but because people love the land. They want to be able to access that land. They want their kids, their grandchildren to be able to. And so I think in this issue, there was a fundamental miscalculation, and I think we're already seeing a reversal of the tides on this issue and other issues. And I think it's important to remember that we've got a wide coalition here, and one which I think universally cares about the same thing, which is public lands being for the public. So thank y'all.
No, thank you, and thank you for shouting out to Florida and the work that they did there. Again, that work isn't too much different than what we're asking people to engage in now, right? With some exceptions. And one of the things that I was going to close with for us, as we're thinking about, we're 19 minutes over time, right? And we all have places to go. The reality is that there are thousands of human beings right now that are in cages. And so, every time we can ground ourselves with that and find a little bit more, if I can find a little bit more, it helps me. And then when Edward talked about these coalitions, the people that you see on this screen either met each other in stride during the presentation 30 minutes ago or met each other, out at the border wall itself and took a chance to listen to other people. So whether that's outside, whether that's, fighting for some in your backyard. It's important that we continue to do that. And the last thing I'll leave y'all with is Amnesty International actually issued a report on the human rights considerations and conditions inside of Alligator Alcatraz last year. And the very first paragraph of that report is a statement from an incarcerated person that says, "We're locked up in 1,000-square-foot cages. There are 32 people in each cage, 8 cages inside the tent. The lights are like stadium lights. They're always on. They're never turned off or even dimmed. It's very cold. The air conditioning is very strong. There are a lot of mosquitoes." And right now in the United States of America, that's the case for people on a tarmac, on lands that we are paying for, and it's something that we have to stop. And if you think about from an environmental standpoint, similar to many things I didn't know about with our parks, I wasn't aware of dark skies designations, and I wasn't aware of the proximity of the Florida Trail to Alligator Alcatraz. And now when I go on that trail, I can see the light not just pollute the sky, but know that that light is coming from somebody who can't sleep at night, who during certain times of the year is in the collision course of a hurricane. These things are imminent, same way that Trisha said, the same way we're treating our rivers. And so we have time now to stop the harm. And then we also have more time to produce this Project 2029 she coined there. So I just want to say thank you for y'all's time. And if you can go to the last slide, Christian, I'll just say briefly, we're going to share out all this information. We're going to get links and how you can support. And but 3 things I just wanted to highlight coming up right away. On April 4th, coming up soon, there's a rally at the state capitol in Austin, Texas, about the border wall in Big Bend. So we talked about some DHS accountability. The Sierra Club has endorsed with several other organizations, some of which are represented here, a letter demanding that we strip appropriations for border wall construction in Big Bend. We talk about resistance and using outings as a strategy. We're working with Danny and our Georgia chapter here to get together with the Florida chapter in the Okefenokee this upcoming year and talk about some of these same issues like we did in the Everglades. And then we have some digital actions that we'll share out, telling Governor DeSantis, who the power is in his hands now because the federal government withdrew, it looks like, their support to shut down that facility. The same way we can tell Governor Abbott to shut down that wall. The Texas legislature actually, got out of the border wall construction game after they spent $11 billion and were not reimbursed by the government earlier this year or last year. And then finally, we can tell Congress to hold DHS accountable and ensure that these same talking points are married to the talking points about no mask, no warrantless searches, and everything else that we don't want to see happening in our communities. So on that, I appreciate it. I'm grateful for y'all spending y'all evenings. I think everybody's on evening time now with us. And please feel free to reach out directly to see if you can get involved and share any idea. No contributions too small. So thank you.